The player acquisition portion of this NFL offseason is pretty much over to this point. At this time, we pretty much know how each NFL team is going to look week 1 of the NFL season. It is now our time as fans to give our favorite teams unrealistic expectations for the new year because we believe in our team more than everybody else does. Yes, Cleveland, you guys are going to be sneaky this year. It is now also time for us as fans to rank these teams based on how we know that they're going to end up next season, because everybody is an analyst, everybody is always 100% correct, and I will be right. There is no ifs, ands, buts about it, because we all know that preseason, not even preseason, like pre-preseason rankings always turn out perfectly. Anyway, how is your beautiful day going on this beautiful day? Today it is time to power rank every single team in the NFL after offseason acquisitions have transpired. At number 32, I have the Miami Dolphins. There's just not a lot to look forward to with this team. You think signing a guy like Malik Willis would be a team trying to take a chance on a free agent quarterback who had a lot of promise coming in from last year. But at the end of the day, this team is just not very good. Their defense is all right. I mean, it wasn't bad by the end of the year. The run defense was actually pretty solid. But this team pretty much has no weapons besides Devon Achane. There's really nothing on this team at all that's kind of redeeming. The offensive line just isn't that good. It might be better, but it just isn't that good. The weapons are absolutely nothing, as I said, besides Devon Achane himself. The quarterback isn't good enough for this bad of infrastructure to look good. Like, Malik Willis is going to have a rough year next year. And then if we go back to draft night, you had Caleb Downs right in your hand, one of the best players in the draft. Some people even believe that he might be the best player in the draft, but you trade back, which is not a terrible idea if you think you really have a guy that you really want. But then you drafted Caden Proctor, who you could have got way later if you really needed to. You probably could have even had him at your second first overall pick, or not first overall, but first round pick. You probably could have had him there. Whatever, that was just a terrible pick. The Miami Dolphins, in my opinion, are the worst team in the league this year. At number 31 is the Arizona Cardinals. The only thing that doesn't make them the worst team in the league and makes them slightly better than Miami is I do think that they have some good offensive weapons on this team. If Jacoby Brissett ends up being the quarterback, he's going to be able to produce a decent offense. Like, it won't be like crazy, because at the end of the day it's still Jacoby Brissett, but there's talent on this offense. Jeremiah Love is a solid piece. James Conner will be back. We know he's old, so he may not do anything, but also Trey Benson is still there. Then they also are going to have Tyler Algier in that backfield. They really have a stacked backfield, if we're being honest. Then obviously you're going to have Trey McBride, who's arguably the best tight end in football. Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson. I mean, there is some solid pieces on the offensive side of the ball for the Cardinals. You know, their quarterback situation, their offensive line, and their defense are major problems, which obviously make this team the 31st best team in the league, but I don't think they're as bad as the Dolphins. At number 30, I have the Cleveland Browns. At the end of the day, we know that the Cleveland defense is always going to be a good unit. They have the best defensive player in the entire world, and they do have good defensive pieces. Overall, they've just always been a good defense. It matters if they can get this offense working, and they actually invested some things into their offensive infrastructure, trying to get some wide receivers in there with KC Concepcion and Denzel Boston, who I think that's a good pairing with Jerry Jeudy. You have a playmaker in Jerry Jeudy and a playmaker in KC Concepcion, and then Denzel Boston can be your big receiver that you throw jump balls to, which is kind of the perfect situation for Denzel Boston. And then you also still have Harold Fannin. The offensive line with Spencer Fano may be slightly better than it was last year. Maybe it's the same as it was last year. Overall, the offensive line isn't going to look amazing, and the quarterback is a major issue. You have to deal with Deshaun Watson, who last time he played was the worst starter in the league, or you'll have to deal with Shedeur Sanders, who also was probably one of the worst starters in the league. You don't have good options in your quarterback room either. So those are going to be your major pitfalls, but you have a good defense and you have some new offensive talent, and you also have a great run game. You have Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson, who I think are both fantastic players. So the Browns do actually have some decent upside. I don't think they can be a playoff team this year, but they do have some upside. At number 29, we have the New York Jets. There's a world where this Jets offense this year is legitimately dangerous, because if Geno Smith can go back to some of the version that he was with the Seahawks, and then he has Breece Hall, A.D. Mitchell, Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper Jr., Kenyon Sadiq, like these are just really, really solid pieces possibly. We don't know how good Omar Cooper and Sadiq will be, but they are highly talented prospects in this draft. So if everything goes right, this offense has a high ceiling, but overall, there's just not a lot of crazy upside, especially with your quarterback situation, because of the fact that Geno Smith just hasn't been good since last year. I mean, he was one of the worst starters in the league, and you know, maybe he turns his career around again and has another Pro Bowl-like season, but I just do not see that happening. And they don't have Quinnen Williams or Sauce Gardner anymore. They did add some nice veterans to this defense, but they're still going to be a very old defense, and they don't have any actual game changers on that side of the ball right now. At number 28, I have the New Orleans Saints. The Saints offense has a chance to be really good this season. You have Jordan Tyson, who you just drafted. Obviously, Tyler Shuck is going into his second year. Chris Olave, Travis Etienne you got in free agency, Juwan Johnson you were able to retain. You also got Noah Fant as a secondary tight end, which I just think the receiving upside of that tight end room is really, really good. Their defense is just not good though. I don't have a lot of trust. They don't have any game changers on that side of the ball, any true playmakers. So their defense is going to be a major question, and if their offense isn't one of the better ones in the league, I don't see a high upside for this Saints team. At number 27, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. Now they actually have a lot of upside as well. They kind of can be a team that I would equate to maybe like the 24 Commanders, although I don't think that they can go all the way to the AFC Championship game, because the AFC is kind of stacked in a way at the top right now. I don't think that they could be that good, but now they have their QB, who hopefully can look like a franchise QB. He's going to be able to be working with all pro talents in Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers. Their wide receiver talent isn't fantastic, but their offensive line should be significantly improved from last season. And that was one of their biggest problems why Ashton Genty couldn't have one of the better rookie running back seasons we've ever seen, is because they had one of the most incompetent lines in the league. And now they have probably the best center in the league, and they built a little bit around him. So hopefully their offensive line is going to look better. And also, they invested a lot of money in their defense. They got new linebackers. They got two of them. They got Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker. They were also able to retain Max Crosby. This defense can actually be a solid unit going into next season. But you're going to hear me say this with a lot of young teams. The downside of these teams is they are this young. So many things could go wrong. The Raiders are dealing with a first-year head coach who he may not even be good. Clint Kubiak is a great play caller, but at the end of the day, we're not entirely sure how good he is at the head coaching duties. And if he's really bad, this team could be really bad. We're not sure about Fernando Mendoza, although a lot of people are very, very high on him, and there seems to be a high floor with a player like Fernando Mendoza. You never know how he's going to translate into the league. There's still a ton of questions with the Raiders, but they have very, very high upside this season. At number 26 is the Tennessee Titans. You're going to hear me talk a lot about upside in the next 10 different teams. There's so much upside in this range, and it starts with the Tennessee Titans, who in my opinion could be a team like the 2025 Patriots, where they just go and play some fantastic football and put it all together all at the same time. I love what they did with their coaches. They got culture setters in Robert Saleh. Brian Dable is a fantastic coordinator. I think he's going to be great for the growth of this offense. Cam Ward is an awesome player. I think he's a franchise quarterback. Still technically yet to see, but he's going to be fantastic in my opinion. You got Wan'Dale Robinson in free agency. You drafted maybe the best wide receiver in the draft in Carnell Tate. Like I said earlier, you got Robert Saleh, who is a defensive-minded head coach, and he is a solid defensive mind himself. And you have Jeffrey Simmons and John Franklin Myers on that front line. This defense is going to be solid. This offense is going to be much improved from last year. A lot more weapons for Cam Ward to work with. I love what they did. Like I said, their upside is through the roof. Their downside is their young pieces. Can everybody mesh together? And if they don't, it's not going to look very great. And it may not look very great this first season anyway, because it is a really young team. But they could be shooting up this list really quick this season. At number 25, I have the Washington Commanders. The Commanders are kind of a tricky one because you do believe that they have a franchise quarterback, and he can be one of the top 10, top 5 quarterbacks in the league when he's playing at his best. The playmaking talent on this team, especially at the wide receiver position, besides Terry McLaurin, is just not very good. And you have to worry about whether Terry McLaurin is going to be healthy a lot. I do think that they made some great moves like Amik Robertson and drafting Sonny Styles. They made some good moves on their defense. They got a little bit younger. They got a little bit faster, which is things that they absolutely did need to do. Their run game still just doesn't look that good. It looks scary, in my opinion. As far as offensive playmakers, they just didn't get that much better. And that was a major need for them in this offseason. They also got players like Adafe Owe and Leo Chenal, who I also think will be very solid players for this defense, but I just don't think these are all needle movers for the overall lack of talent, speed, and age that the Washington Commanders have to deal with. At number 24, I have the Atlanta Falcons, who I believe are such a talented team on both sides of the ball. You think of all the young talent that they have already on this team. You got Bijan Robinson, you got Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Jalen Walker. We'll see what happens with the James Pierce stuff. I don't even know what's going on over there. They have Jesse Bates, AJ Terrell. This team actually has a ton of young talent. Their problem, and the big thing that they're missing, is a quarterback. And I hate to harp on him because you think that maybe Michael Penix has some juice in there, and maybe he does. But my problem is that he is already an older quarterback from the start. I mean, he's not like at the end of his career old, but in terms of him being technically only playing his 2.5 year this year and coming off of like his second ACL problem, I just don't know how much I trust Michael Penix. Not only that, he just doesn't have a lot of touch when he's throwing with the football. I don't think that Michael Penix is good enough to be a effective quarterback for this team, and they don't really have any better option with Tua. Tua just has no arm. It's a noodle there. He's just not a real NFL quarterback when it comes to arm talent, and he's no longer able to read the field like he used to be able to, so Tua is not really a good backup option for Michael Penix. This QB room just looks really rough for the Falcons, and until they can get that fixed, this team might not be going very anywhere. At number 23 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As long as they can stay healthy, this team can be pretty solid. It's just the fact that I don't know if they have a high ceiling with their quarterback being Baker Mayfield. And a lot of people want to be on the Baker Mayfield love train, and I absolutely understand it. He's one of the most electrifying players in the league. But at the end of the day, when it comes to leading a team to the championship or leading the team to winning a playoff game or two, you just have to be one of those elite guys, and Baker Mayfield is just not that. He doesn't have good footwork. His downfield accuracy is just not very good, and when it was good for 6 weeks this season, or last season. It was good for 6 weeks last season, and then it took a major downpour, and I understand he had some injuries, but at the end of the day, that was the best it had been in his entire career, was that first 6 games, and I just am not going to take a 6-game sample size from everything else I've seen before and after, when he wasn't good after either. I love Baker Mayfield. He's such a fun player to watch, but at the end of the day, this team is handicapped until they can really get a game changer at their quarterback position or somebody that's just a little better, because the defense is just not good enough at the end of the day. I think they have some good young talent coming in. At the end of the day, I don't think Tampa Bay's defense is good enough to support a quarterback that isn't like a game changer. And Baker Mayfield has game-changing moments, but he's not a game changer. At number 22 is the Carolina Panthers. They are really scary when it comes to the defensive side of the ball next year. They were already a pretty solid defense, and the two things that they weren't very good at was their linebacking core and their pass rush, and they went and got Jalen Phillips, who does have injury problems, but at the end of the day, when he's played, he's an awesome pass rusher, one of the better ones in the league, and he's a fantastic run defender as well. And in your linebacking core, you signed Devin Lloyd to a very team-friendly deal, and he was the best linebacker in free agency this year. You're only paying him $15 million over the next 3 years. Absolute bargain for the Panthers. So the Panthers defense is going to be awesome. The problem for the Panthers is with all the talent that they do have on the offensive side of the ball, I'm not going to try and knock the Panthers' talent, but their quarterback is just not it. And a lot of people want to be in the Bryce Young love train, and I totally understand. He's a great guy. It's like Bryce Young is the type of guy that you really want to root for. But at the end of the day, I think we've seen his ceiling. I think what we saw last year was Bryce Young's ceiling. Bryce Young is not going to be getting really that much better than he already is. And I don't think right now he's good enough for the Panthers to be able to win a championship or be a real contender. And at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to work towards. And I think that they could be a contender for consistent playoff success with a better quarterback. And they would be a much more dangerous team. But Bryce Young is so inconsistent, and it's so hard to get the best out of him, that I think they're kind of handicapped until they can find a quarterback that would better fit that system. Love Bryce Young, but unfortunately I don't think that he's the guy. At number 21, I have the New York Giants. They might legitimately have the most intriguing young core of any team on this list. They're another team that I feel like has a chance to shoot into the playoffs this year and maybe be a really good team. They have a new head coach that can set the culture over there, a guy that's known for winning, at least in the regular season. Obviously, Harbaugh's not the best when it comes to winning in the playoffs, but at least we know he's a very good regular season head coach. Their offensive weapons are going to be healthy. They're going to have Cam Scatterbo back. Malik Neighbors is going to be back. Jackson Dart looks like he has franchise quarterback potential. The defense with Arvell Reese, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, they have so much good young talent on this team. Maybe it doesn't get put together all in year one, but I do think that the Giants are going to look pretty solid this year with this young core, and it could go all wrong and look absolutely horrible in there at the bottom of the standings again. That can totally happen. Maybe Jackson Dart was a one-year wonder or something like that. I don't know. Anything could happen, but I do think that there is a bright future ahead with the New York Giants. At number 20 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. As of right now, it is rumored that A-Rod is going to be back in a Steelers uniform this season, and if they get the version of Aaron Rodgers that they had last year, in theory, they should be a better team. I think the weapons are better. They have Michael Pittman now, and they also drafted Jeremy Bernard, who I think is going to be a very dynamic player in the slot for this team. They also got Rico Dowdle for their run game. Jennings Dunker and Max Iheanacho, I think, are going to be fantastic players for this offensive line that needed to get better. And I honestly believe that the Steelers defense underperformed last year. I think they're better than they were last year. We know these Steelers teams to be good defensive teams, and by the end of the season, that defense was a lot better than it was to begin the season. I think we will see a resurgence of the Steelers defense being a pretty solid unit, especially with some of their younger pieces starting to develop a little bit more. I think we do see the Steelers go a 10-7 or a 9-8 once again next season, because the fact of the matter is this team doesn't really have any upside. I mean, the most upside that they could have is if Will Howard or Drew Aller decide to play or are able to play this year, and one of them is just their next franchise quarterback, which I guess is possible to happen. I'm not going to write that off, but that is their only chance for upside as of right now. At number 19 is the Indianapolis Colts. This team might be the hardest team to rank on the entire list, because at the end of the day, the offensive and defensive talent should have this team tons higher. But injuries are giving me a bit of an issue right now because they did have a lot of injuries last year, and their biggest one being their starting quarterback, Daniel Jones. Before Daniel Jones broke his leg in like week 10 or something like that, he was starting to look worse, and people want to blame the injuries for Daniel Jones' fall off last year. But before his first injury of the season, he had his 2 worst games of the season, and overall he just didn't look that as good as he did in those first 8 games. And then he broke his leg, and then he tore his Achilles. So even if you get that version of Daniel Jones back that you had in the first 8 games, do you really believe that this team is going to be good enough to win a championship? But like I said, this team has all the talent in the world. They have Alec Pierce, who looks amazing. Josh Downs is also a fantastic slot wide receiver. They have an all-pro talent at tight end. They have an all-pro talent at running back, who almost won MVP after a fantastic start to the season last year. They have one of the best corners in the league in Sauce Gardner. They just drafted CJ Allen, who I think will be fantastic for them. Laiatu Latu is a fantastic pass rusher. There's a lot of players that I'm probably forgetting about, but the overall infrastructure of this team looks a lot better, and there's a chance for the Colts to look really good again next year. At number 18, I have the Minnesota Vikings, who have probably the highest upside on this list in my opinion. Kyler Murray as a quarterback, because of his height, has limitations. I understand that, but I don't think that Kyler Murray has been used to his full potential since 2021. Kyler Murray has been kind of reduced to a pocket playing quarterback, and that it just is not his strengths. He's not a player that's going to be able to be very successful in the pocket, and that is a limitation. But it helps when he might be one of the most, if not the most athletic quarterback in the league. You can say Lamar, you can say Josh Allen, but Kyler Murray is up there. He's one of the fastest players in the league regardless of position, and he's just so dynamic when he's able to get out of the pocket. Kevin O'Connell being able to have someone like Kyler Murray who has as much talent as Kyler Murray has is just a marriage that seems like it's going to work perfectly. This offense can be extremely dangerous if they're all healthy when you have a player like Kyler Murray being able to at least run this offense a little bit better, probably get the ball to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, all fantastic targets. And the Minnesota offensive line isn't the best in the world, but that's okay because you have such an athletic, dynamic quarterback in the backfield who can make any throw on the field. And they were able to retain Brian Flores, so this defense is going to be good again. It is going to be a very, very solid defense once again because they have a mastermind at defensive coordinator. This team's ceiling is absolutely through the roof. There is the chance that Kyler Murray has injury problems and is not able to stay on the field. And if JJ McCarthy is going to have to play a lot of this season, it's going to look a lot similar to what it did last season. Maybe he gets a little bit better, but at the end of the day, I just don't think this team is going to be very good if it has to deal with a quarterback like JJ McCarthy, who's just not good at all. At number 17, I have the Detroit Lions. At the end of the day, the big dangerous part about the Detroit Lions is the fact that their offense is always going to be ridiculously deadly, with the fact that they have probably some of the fastest unit in the league. Like Jahmyr Gibbs and Jamison Williams are just so quick, and then you have a master route runner and Amon-Ra St. Brown that they also have to deal with. They just have so many weapons and fast people on this offense, and then obviously they have such a dynamic tight end in Sam Laporta. At the end of the day, the Lions offense is always going to be super, super dangerous, and they also have players like Jack Campbell, Aiden Hutchinson, and Brian Branch, who are always going to make this Lions defense a relatively solid unit. They'll also have Kirby Joseph returning. Their corner depth is rough, and besides Jack Campbell, I don't think they have any good linebackers, and their interior defensive line isn't the best in the world. But the biggest downfall for the Detroit Lions, I've said it so many times, and if you are a reoccurring viewer to my channel, you know exactly who I am going to talk about next. It's Jared Goff. He's just not going to be the guy to win in high leverage situations, and until they're rid of him, it's just hard to put this team any higher than they are now. And they could have a good regular season, but I just don't know if it matters when it comes playoff time at the end of the day. In the games where Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery were taking over the game last year, the Lions just weren't that good of a football team because Jared Goff was not that great of a quarterback. At number 16 is the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are going to have one of the best offenses in the league. They had one of the best offenses in the league last year. They have a good run game. They have great weapons in their receiving game with George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, and Jake Ferguson. They have a great quarterback, and they have a good offensive line. They're going to be solid on the offensive side of the ball. It's really the defense, which I do think is going to look better than we think normal Cowboys defenses are going to be, because like last year it was one of the worst units in the league, but now they have Rashawn Gary, who's going to be able to give them some pass rush, and they absolutely needed that. They're still going to have Quinnen Williams, and they're going to have Kenny Clark, so the defensive line actually doesn't look too horrible. I think the corners are pretty bad. You still have Deron Bland, but I mean the corners just aren't very good. But they also just drafted Caleb Downs, and in my opinion he was the best player in the entire draft. They may have some holes, but I think Caleb Downs might be the type of player that can close those up. At number 15 is the Los Angeles Chargers. Their biggest problem last year was offensive line. It was the worst unit in football. It was absolutely downright terrible. And now you are getting your 2 all-pro talent tackles back on the squad. As far as interior offensive line, you didn't really invest into it that well. You kind of grabbed players that were the same as the players you already had. No real upgrades there. So that's going to be still scary for this offensive line. If Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater start having injury problems again, they're just going to be right back to where they were last year. The best part about the Chargers is that they have one of the best regular season quarterbacks in the league on their team. Justin Herbert, for all of his pitfalls in the playoffs, he is a fantastic regular season quarterback. There is a reason that people have so much faith in a player like Justin Herbert. It's because of the talent that he possesses and the fact that he's such a good regular season quarterback. But at the end of the day, he's going to have to be able to put it together in the playoffs. And I just don't know how much this team is even better than it was last year. If not, it could be a worse team. I don't love what the Chargers did in this offseason. I think their defense has been overachieving as of the past couple years because they had such a fantastic defensive coordinator who's able to squeeze all this talent out of this defense that just didn't have that much talent. I don't think anybody is going to be able to get the same talent out of this defense that Jesse Minter was able to. So I don't love the way that their defense is looking, and I also don't trust their offense in the playoffs. Maybe I'm completely wrong and they're way higher on this list by the end of the season, or maybe they're way lower. I don't know. At number 14, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. At the end of the day, they still have Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence had his most consistent string of games to end last season, which is going to always give you hope that he can be a fantastic quarterback. And if he can, you're always going to be a competitive team. If you have a coach who is as good as Liam Cohen is, then you always can have some hope that the team is going to be good. But overall, I think Jacksonville got worse this offseason. They were kind of dormant when it came to free agency, and in the draft, I don't think they got anything necessarily game-changing. You lost Travis Etienne and tried to replace him with Chris Rodriguez, which I just don't think is going to work. Overall, your wide receiver core and your pass-catching core is not too bad, so it's not something that you had to deal with. But your secondary, just not very good, and I know you can throw Travis Hunter over there and hopefully he turns out to be one of the better corners in the league and you don't have to worry about any of this. But at the end of the day, it's still a question mark and you didn't do anything with it. And the other part of this offseason is that you lost Devin Lloyd for a very affordable price. Someone only paid him $15 million in the year to go to their team. And I know that you could have done that for an all-pro linebacker to stay on your team with the chemistry of this defense. But now you lose such a big player like that and don't really replace him with anything even close to as good as him. I just think that the Jacksonville Jaguars as a whole look worse than they did when the season ended. At number 13 is the San Francisco 49ers. The good part about the 49ers is that they have probably the best coach in the league, or one of the best coaches in the league. In my opinion right now, I think he might be the best in terms of being able to get the talent out of his players. no matter who he's playing with, no matter the injuries that they have, he was able to still get this team to 12-5 last year. So it's hard to put this team too far down on the list because they have a coach like that. But with injuries being such a reoccurring theme with this team, I can't leave it out. Like I have to put that in for their ranking because they're always injured. Always. I don't know what season in recent memory the 49ers haven't had at least 1 to 2 to 3 major injuries on their team. They're getting older. They're still going to have to deal with those injuries probably. I just don't love the idea of the 49ers as a long-term contender, especially with the aging that this team is having to go through anyway. Not only that, they got older because you signed Mike Evans, which I understand you needed some receiver talent because you're losing Jawan Jennings. But I don't know. I think Mike Evans was just not the right player for this team because you're an injury-prone team who just got an injury-prone wide receiver. I understand most of his career he hasn't been injury-prone, but he's a lot older now and has dealt with injuries the past 2 years. So I don't know. I think he's starting to become injury prone because he's older. I just think the upside for the 49ers is not very high and the downside could be really, really low. At number 12 is the Green Bay Packers. I think they lost a lot of talent in free agency, which kind of dings them a lot, but at the end of the day, they have a true elite quarterback and they do have a solid offensive-minded head coach. LaFleur has had his problems and people are calling for his job, but at the end of the day, I think he's a fantastic offensive play caller most of the time. They still have Josh Jacobs. If Christian Watson can stay healthy, this offense is going to be really good. And like I said, no matter what people try and tell you, Jordan Love is an elite top 10 quarterback. He's fantastic. And with Micah Parsons coming back, this defense is going to be solid. With Micah Parsons, your defense is going to be solid because he kind of welds a lot of holes. So you hope he comes back full strength because Micah Parsons is a game wrecker. Before Micah Parsons got hurt last season, this Green Bay Packers team was a Super Bowl contender, and I think they still can be. The possibility, they still can be if Micah Parsons comes back and looks as good as he did before he left. At number 11, we have the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are still going to be the best defense in the league. They got even better with Caden McDonald. I think that's just the perfect fit for their defense, and they're going to wreak havoc on teams. And they also heavily invested into their offensive line for the first offseason in CJ Stroud's career, which is super, super good for the Texans. And I think it's going to give CJ Stroud a resurgence of confidence, and we might see a significantly better CJ Stroud version this season. And they're also going to have their wide receiver weapons healthy, and their running back room with David Montgomery looks a lot more solid. So this offense does look like it can work a lot better. It's just a big make or break season for CJ Stroud. If the Texans don't end up looking like a Super Bowl contender by the end of the year and possibly making a push at the Super Bowl, we might see a change at quarterback for the Houston Texans. At number 10 is the Cincinnati Bengals. Barring any injuries, this is the best offense in football at the end of the day. They have probably the best wide receiver room in the league with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Andre Yosivach, who is also a very, very good player. Chase Brown is a very solid running back. We know Joe Burrow is a top 4 quarterback in the league. A couple years ago, he led the league in yards and touchdowns. The offensive line is better than some people might think. Last year, it actually was a decent unit, and they just traded for Dexter Lawrence, who's a complete game changer on the defensive line. They also signed Boye Mafe, who is a fantastic pass rusher. They were able to create a team who actually has a decent defensive line, and if you're going to try and rebuild a defense, you start with the defensive line. That's the most important part of it. With a good pass rushing defensive tackle, as well as a just really good run defender at defensive tackle with Dexter Lawrence, and then you also have some better pass rushing talent than you had before, and hopefully Shamar Stewart starts to look better or starts to develop into a better player. This defense might actually be like average next year, and that's all you need. You have the best offense in football when everybody's healthy, and hopefully everybody stays healthy. All you need is your defense to be average, and this team is easily a playoff team. Like easily. So easily. The Cincinnati Bengals are a playoff team as long as their defense can just be okay. Also, for anybody who thinks that Zach Taylor might also be their undoing, I guess I could see that happening, but I think that Zach Taylor gets a bad rap for not having a good team. The reason that the Cincinnati Bengals are bad, or have been bad the last few years, was injuries last year. They started 2-0 with Joe Burrow, and then when Joe Burrow came back, they actually won more games again. So they honestly looked like a solid team, and it's because their defense sucked, not because of their offense. I know Zach Taylor has made some questionable decisions sometimes, but oftentimes he makes questionable decisions because he's put in terrible positions by the awful defensive play that he has to deal with. Zach Taylor is a solid offensive play caller. At the end of the day, he's a solid offensive play caller. He leads one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the league. I know it's not that hard to do with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, but he still does at the end of the day. And he's been able to do it without needing a run game. Without needing a super hardy run game. The Bengals will be back, barring health. Everybody might crumble into flames. So maybe not. At number 9 is the Kansas City Chiefs, and they finally have a run game for this offense. Last year, the Chiefs still had one of the most efficient offenses in the league when Mahomes was playing. They just were not good at generating big plays, whether it was through the run game or through the pass game. No matter what it was, they just couldn't generate big plays because they don't have weapons in their wide receiver or tight end core. And once again this year, they don't have weapons in their wide receiver and tight end core. But they have somebody who can make some pretty big plays in the run game. And if Patrick Mahomes can kind of look like game manager Patrick Mahomes and just do enough, and then Kenneth Walker break off some big plays, the Chiefs are going to be back to being a really good offense. And they already were a successful offense last year. It was more about the defense. And the defense didn't get that much better. You traded away Trent McDuffie, but you got back Mansour Delane. The Chiefs are kind of a team that, like, you expect that they're not going to lose as many games as they did last year because they have Patrick Mahomes back, and you expect them to not have 2 straight losing seasons. But at the end of the day, I don't think this roster is all that much better than it was last year. It's Kenneth Walker, who's a big addition, no doubt, but after that, I just don't know how much better this team is than it was last season. At number 8 is the Chicago Bears. Another season under Ben Johnson. This offense is going to look awesome next year. I really think this offense is going to be so fantastic, with Caleb Williams having another year with Ben Johnson, another year to kind of work on his game managing part of his game other than his just pure playmaking. But he's just one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league, and he is on a crazy pace when it comes to progression in year 1 to year 2, and we'll see what happens in year 3. Their receiving core is still very fantastic. They have an all-pro talent at tight end. Their run game is going to be really good because they have one of the best run game coordinators in the league in Ben Johnson. The defense might be a little bit better because now you have Kobe Bryant on the team. Jalen Johnson is hopefully going to be able to play more games this season. They also drafted Dylan Thieneman, who I think will be fantastic for this defense. The thing that the Bears didn't really address was their pass rush. It was just not good last season. They were not able to get after the quarterback, and they didn't really fix that problem. They didn't address it almost at all. So that's going to be a problem that we're going to have to watch. I don't know. This defense still might not be that good going into next season because of this defensive line. But what I do know is their offense is going to be fantastic, and that's where they're going to make their money next year.
Hi, it's darker because this is editing, Brody, realizing that I completely skipped over the number 7 team when I was filming this video. The number 7 team is the Buffalo Bills. For the Buffalo Bills, you have the best backfield in the league. You have a top 5 running back, and you have a top 5 quarterback, and probably a top 2 quarterback at the end of the day. Those guys are going to carry you into good positions, and you're always going to be in the playoffs if you are the Bills. I also think that DJ Moore is going to be a major building block for how this offense is going to operate. He is a fantastic deep threat, and I think that's going to be something that they're going to be able to use massive this year. I don't know if he's necessarily going to have the same impact as Stephon Diggs, but I do think that he could have a very similar impact to what Stephon Diggs had in his prime with the Bills. The defense continues to be a major question mark for them. I think it got worse from last season, and they invested into a very aging Bradley Chubb, which I just thought was probably the worst signing of the offseason. Their defense is just not going to be a very good unit next year, in my personal opinion, which is going to majorly hinder this Buffalo team from being any higher than this place right now.
At number 6 is the Baltimore Ravens. I think they significantly underperformed last year, especially because of Zachary Orr and their defensive coordinating. I think Jesse Minter's just the absolute perfect person to put into this team so that he can get the most out of the talent of their defense. I talked about earlier how he got the most out of the Chargers defense for a couple years, and I think that the Baltimore Ravens defense is much more talented than the Chargers defense. I mean, the Chargers have somebody like Derwin James, but the Ravens have Kyle Hamilton, who is arguably a top 3 defending player in the entire NFL. And I think Jesse Minter with a player like that is just going to be absolutely nasty. Their defense is not going to be nearly as bad as it was last season. And their offense is always going to be a solid unit with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. The biggest problem everybody knows is their pass catchers are still just not very good. They drafted Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt, who are going to be like good players to watch out for. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the pass rushing talent, it's Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. And then you lost Charlie Kolar and you lost Isaiah Likely. The pass catching talent looks almost worse than it did last year. But at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are still going to provide a lot of offense for this team. At number 5 is the New England Patriots. They have Drake May, who's an MVP candidate. He's one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. He did have an underwhelming playoffs, and the rest of the season for him was kind of relatively easier games, and they're going to have a lot of tougher games to play this year. But getting an addition like A.J. Brown, technically not official, but he's expected to be traded there by at the June 1st deadline or whatever, when some money things change for some teams. So they're expected to have A.J. Brown. Kayshon Boutte's a very fantastic player as well. The offensive line is probably going to get a little bit better. I do think that the Patriots are still one of the top 5 teams in the league, and they're going to look really good next year. There is chance for drop-off because of the fact that they didn't play that many really good teams last year, and they're going to play a lot of really good teams this year. So they're going to have a lot harder of a time being a playoff team this year, but I think they're going to be perfectly fine with it, especially with, again, the addition of a player like A.J. Brown. Their biggest downfall right now is going to be the Mike Vrabel drama. I don't know if it's going to affect the team. Maybe it does not affect the team. There is the real possibility that this doesn't affect the team whatsoever. But I mean, it's pretty huge news right now, and I could see it affecting the team. At number 4 is the Philadelphia Eagles. They are one of the most talented teams in the league. It always really depends on their coaching, whether they are going to get the coaching down the way it's supposed to get down. Last year's coaching hire cycle really sucked for their offensive coordinator, and if it happens again, Nick Sirianni's probably out of there. And I just don't think Nick Sirianni's a very good head coach himself. He kind of holds this team back. But hey, they won a championship with them, so what do I know? We'll see how. I think it was Sean Mannion that signed with them for their offensive coordinator position. We'll see how he does there. I don't know. We'll see. One of their other faults right now is going to be their offensive line. We don't know if it's going to be back to the unit it was last year. It'll hopefully be a little bit more healthy and maybe better than it was last year. But last year's Eagles offensive line was not as good as a normal Eagles offensive line. Saquon Barkley felt like he had no real holes and no real room to run. I think a lot of it had to do with scheme when it came to it, but it also, the offensive line just wasn't as good as it was in previous years. And there's always the question of Jalen Hurts and whether he's the guy. I think a lot of people give him a lot of crap for last year, and it's very justified. I think there was a lot of things that Jalen Hurts could have done better last year, but I think under a better offensive mind, I don't know if that is Sean Mannion, but whatever it is, if he's under a better offensive mind, we can see a better version of Jalen Hurts. I don't think that he is what he is last year, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes for Jalen Hurts. At number 3 is the Denver Broncos. The Denver's biggest hole on the whole team last year was obviously their offense, and the biggest hole on their offense was the fact that they really don't have any playmakers. They had some at the beginning of the season with J.K. Dobbins, but when he got hurt and got hurt for the rest of the season, pretty much all of our real playmakers were gone. RJ Harvey was able to do it every once in a while out of the backfield by catching the football, but again, there wasn't a lot of playmakers on this team, a lot of guys who were able to do work if Bo Nix wasn't giving it to them. Well, they traded for Jalen Waddle, who is one of the best deep threats in the league. He's one of the best playmakers in the league. He's one of the fastest wide receivers in the league. He's one of the most dynamic wide receivers in the league, and a lot of his lack of production for the past couple of years has been the system that he's in, and the fact that he's playing with a quarterback like Tua who can't get him the ball normal. Tua didn't have the arm to air it out and get the ball to Jalen Waddle down the field like any other quarterback can, and Bo Nix can. I think that Jalen Waddle opens up this offense, and the unit that was kind of very middle tier last year, they get a new offensive play caller with Davis Webb, they get J.K. Dobbins back, who's hopefully healthy, and they have Jonah Coleman, who they drafted, who I think was probably the 3rd best running back in the class. This offense can be super dynamic next season. Ironically enough, the biggest downfall for the Broncos right now is going to be their defense. And while I understand, I do think that we are a top 5 unit in the league. I do think Denver is fantastic defensively, but they have a problem with turnovers, and they have fallen apart back-to-back seasons at the end of the season under Vance Joseph. I understand that Broncos fans have come to love Vance Joseph because he's been able to get a lot out of this squad and make it look like a very good unit, but I also think his defensive scheme gets picked apart by the end of the year, time in and time again. This happened at the end of seasons when he was with the Cardinals. This happened at the end of seasons when he head coached us back in whenever the hell he head coached us, I kind of forgot. And it's happening again right now, where his defenses are very solid to start off the year, but they fall off at the end. And if Vance Joseph's defenses are going to continue to get worse as the season progresses, it's going to be a problem. Now, in the playoffs, I do think the defense was all right against the Patriots. It was a very solid unit. Like the Broncos were able to clamp down on the Patriots very well in that game and gave the Broncos a real shot at winning that game. 400 yards in the divisional round, even though they had 5 turnovers. They were letting the Bills do whatever they wanted. And I think a lot of it has to do with Vance Joseph's scheme. There's so much talent on this defense. So much talent. They're a little undersized, but there's so much talent. They shouldn't be able to be picked apart as easy as they are. And I just don't think Vance Joseph is that amazing of a defensive coordinator. I think he's just blessed with very good talent. At number 2 is the Los Angeles Rams. In my opinion, they lost the Super Bowl. Obviously, it was the NFC Championship game, but whoever won that game, I think, was going on to win the Super Bowl. And their biggest problem in this offseason was their secondary. They had a problem guarding people last year. So what did they do? They went and got Jalen Watson, and they also traded for Trent McDuffie. I mean, that's perfect. They were also able to keep Cam Curl. Their offense is going to be probably the best unit in the league as long as Matthew Stafford can still play at least the same level, or maybe just worse than he was last year. We just have to see how he ages. At the end of the day, the entire Rams season next year will live and die by how good Matthew Stafford is, because after they did a pretty good job fixing this secondary, this Rams team has all the tools to be a Super Bowl winning team next year. And number 1 is Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks, they did lose some players. They lost Kenneth Walker, which I think will suck. They lost Tariq Woolen. They lost Kobe Bryant. But most of the main infrastructure that they needed to go to the championship is still there. And I still think they're good enough to be the best team in the league. They also replaced Kenneth Walker with Jadarian Price. He's a rookie. We don't know how good he's going to be yet, but I think he's a fantastic player to put beside Zach Charbonnet, and this offense is going to be able to run the football. They still have Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's the best wide receiver in football. This team still has a coach who is a defensive mastermind, and they have one of the best defenses in the entire NFL. They're going to be fantastic again next year, and they will be competing for a championship. That was my post-off-season power rankings for the NFL. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.